Good afternoon. Thank you, everyone, for being with us today as we talk about our March Lunchbox session. We have co-presenters with us today, Carolynn Keller and Erin Correa. They're going to talk about getting started with social impact, the power of purposeful businesses. Before we get into the topic, let me give you a little background on both of our presenters today. Carolynn Keller is the founder of Curio 412, an impact management consultancy for businesses who want to strategically engage their communities and measure their social impact. She's provided strategic leadership to nonprofits, foundations, and businesses, and holds a certification in social impact strategies from the National Institute for Social Impact. She was named one of Pittsburgh's 30 under 30 by the Pittsburgh Business Times and Leadership Pittsburgh, and a District 1 difference maker by Allegheny County Council. She holds a master's degree from the University College of London. Nice. Erin Correa is the founder of Correa Legal LLC, a law firm that provides cost-effective legal solutions to entrepreneurs from concept to scale. She believes in empowering clients to make informed decisions about their legal needs and strives to be a partner in helping them grow. Erin is committed to leveraging businesses as a force for good. In addition to running Correa Legal LLC, Erin is an adjunct professor at the University of Pittsburgh School of Law, where she teaches about benefit corporation law and governance. She has guest lectured on legal considerations for social entrepreneurs at the Schwartz Center for Entrepreneurship at Carnegie Mellon University and the University of Pittsburgh's Katz School of Business. Erin currently serves on the board of Sustainable Pittsburgh, a nonprofit organization impacting sustainable decision-making in the southwestern Pennsylvania region. Before starting her own firm, Erin was an associate attorney at Alcoa Corporation's corporate secretary's office, focusing on securities and board governance matters, and served as an associate with K&L Gates LLP in both their Pittsburgh and Dubai offices. So welcome, ladies. Thank you so much for being with us today to present, and I will turn it over to you.
Fabulous. Thank you, Carrie. Erin and I are both excited to be here and glad to bring these topics. Erin, if you want to advance our slides, I know Carrie already got our bios. I'll just briefly say our organization, Curio 412, we've helped in a number of different ways strategically with organizations, but most recently, we've conducted community outreach events, helping to put philanthropy and giving programs together, as well as helping organizations think about their core values, purpose, and that kind of thing. So we've helped a number of businesses and are very excited to continue to see how purpose-driven businesses move forward and do good work in the Pittsburgh region. So I'll turn it over to Erin to give a little bit more background about Correa Law.
Thank you. And thank you, Carrie, for the introduction. We covered it. So for the only thing that I would add is, a lot of the companies that I work with are early stage companies. There are a lot in the tech sector. And we take a lot of what Carolynn does, and we're trying to incorporate a company's values into their legal structure and make it so that the right decisions that they want to be making are the easy decisions to be making from a legal perspective. And yeah, continuing to build out a portfolio of sustainable businesses in Pittsburgh, which is exciting to see that there are a lot of people who are interested in running this kind of business.
So today we're going to take a look at just the introduction to what is social impact and talk about not only the nuances of B corporations and what those types of corporations look like legally, but how any business can really start to incorporate some of the principles of social impact within their current operations and structure. So today, what we'll start with is just what is social impact and give a very broad definition. When Erin and I were putting this together, one of the things we talked about is that there's so many different definitions of what impact can mean. And so we went with a very, very broad definition that is a significant positive change that addresses a pressing social challenge. So I've seen other definitions that also incorporate the business structure as well. But what we both liked about this is that it left it very open-ended to address that social change in a number of different ways. You can either be looking at that from the lens of a nonprofit organization or from the corporate charitable giving of a business. And there is still that idea that there are needs that we see in our communities, and being able to address them in whatever way to make that positive change is really at the start and at the heart of what social impact is. So when we traditionally have thought about how we can go about making changes in our community, traditionally we think of you either have to be a nonprofit, charity, 501c3, or a for-profit company, whether that's an LLC, S Corp, C Corp, and the two haven't often mixed. There's been a very strong history, I think, of corporate giving and companies that give back in the traditional types of ways, whether that's sponsorships or types of funds. But what we are seeing more and more is that the market looks for companies that are not only making a profit, but also doing something good. And to give you a bit of an idea of what that looks like, we'll take a look at some of the stats that are on our next slide here. So I know that there's a lot of text on this. We're going to go over what each of these say, but what these represent are 3 different sectors of how people are thinking about businesses, from the employee perspective, the business leader perspective, and the consumer perspective. So the first stat that we have here is that 67% of employees expect that their business will have a greater purpose and contribute to their well-being as well as social impact. So there's a greater than 50% of employees, when they're looking for a job, and if they're thinking about either staying or moving, are making those considerations of having that greater purpose at work, wanting to feel fulfilled. When you look at business leaders, 89% of business leaders say the companies that lead with a purpose have a competitive advantage in today's marketplace, which is a fairly large number when you think about how many business leaders are approaching their businesses and understanding that not only is it good for a company to contribute positively to society, but it's also better and more competitive for your business. So it is part of that strategic understanding of how your business operates. And then lastly, 53% of consumers say that a brand with a community commitment is a leading purchasing driver. So if a consumer understands that your business is doing good and knows that your business is making that positive change, they're more likely to be more loyal and more interested in keeping your product as part of their regular routine. So from all across the board, you have employees, business leaders, consumers thinking about how they can positively make a change and make a better difference within the communities they live in. And we've been seeing this move fairly regularly. This slide shows a chart from the Edelman Trust Barometer. Edelman Trust Barometer is a global research study that is conducted. I believe it's across over 20 countries, as well as over 30,000 respondents who participate. And it really goes into an understanding of what is trust and how is it being driven within today's marketplace. This chart covers 4 different sectors: government, media, NGOs, and businesses. In previous iterations of the Edelman Trust Barometer, as you'll see in the light gray triangle there have been some things that have been stayed rather consistent and some things that have changed significantly over the past few years. Of the things that have stayed rather consistent, you'll notice that this chart, as it's put together, is on a scale of competency and ethics. So competency is that horizontal axis, ethics is the vertical axis. And when we're thinking about, or people in general are thinking about government and media, they're thinking of them being less competent and not as ethical. But when you think about NGOs, non-government entities, or you're thinking about charitable organizations, they may be seen in that light gray bar as being more ethical, but less competent. And then when you look at businesses, businesses have relatively been seen as more competent, but less ethical. You'll see in the dark gray triangle that has been changing and moving. Those charitable organizations are still seen as ethical, but not as, they haven't quite made it into the competence sector. And when you look at businesses, you'll notice that many businesses have moved into that sector where they were seen as ethical and competent. So what this tells me, because that's a lot to take in just looking at this chart, is that when we think about social impact, we're thinking about social impact as being one of the ways that we can create trust within the consumers that we have, whether those consumers are the people who are purchasing our products or the people that are interacting with our nonprofit organizations. So when you are able to demonstrate and adequately measure and manage the impact that you have, you're able to build that trust. And what we've seen over the course of the last few years is businesses more and more embracing this purpose-driven culture and including purpose and charitable initiatives as part of their strategy, which I think is part of that motion into seeing businesses move from being maybe very competent but not as ethical to moving into that more ethical space. Although it's interesting too to note that the nonprofits haven't moved as much in that competency sector. So being able to articulate and demonstrate those social impact measures will help those charitable organizations maybe move that needle a bit more into competency, being able to really accomplish those key purpose indicators for their organization. So we could probably talk more about this for a while, but we'll move on for now and be glad to answer questions afterwards. So when we're thinking about this in context of our businesses, 2/3 of consumers say that when a company takes a stand on a social or environmental issue, they're going to do research to see if it's authentic, meaning a company, it's not enough for a company to say, here's where our values are. A company must also live those values and be able to support them, which is why social impact management is so important, not only for traditionally, as we've thought about in the nonprofit sector, but more in the business sector as well, because you want to be able to really be held accountable for the values and the purpose that you're standing behind. This isn't, I guess, purpose-driven organizations isn't such a new concept. This is a brief history of social impact and how it has interacted with the business sector. As far back as the 1700s, we think about traditionally Adam Smith being the father of modern capitalism, but he has also included writings on things like the theory of moral sentiments, which really talks about the idea that people need to be giving within their operations. So whether that is part of their personal life or their business life. And as we've moved on, I'm sure that a lot has happened between the 1700s and the 1900s. So we're making a pretty big leap. But when we move into the late 90s, what we find is that all of these ideas around having purpose in your business are starting to become a little more defined and codified. In 1995, Conscious Capitalism came out, a book that really talked to the work of what Whole Foods was doing within their operating model. In 2004, the UN Global Compact coined the term ESG. And then in 2009, Simon Sinek came out with his book, Start With Why, which really talked about that idea that your purpose or that why that really drives your organization should be at the center of everything that your organization does with things radiating out. So as far back as the 1700s to modern days, this idea of purpose-driven businesses has continued to grow and gain popularity and momentum. And Erin, you can go on to that next slide. So what we've seen is what we'll call the rise of the fourth sector. As these organizations, purpose-driven organizations, have started to gain more momentum, you'll see that they come into more of a legal definition and consideration. In 2010, Maryland was the first state to pass benefit corporation legislation. And today, 36 states recognize benefit corporations as a legal business form, which is part of the reason, as we're talking today about purpose-driven businesses, that we have Erin with us with her specialty in purpose-driven businesses and business corporation and business law, or benefit corporation law, to talk a little bit more. And we'll hear from Erin in just a minute. Businesses that are in this fourth sector that combine purpose and profit take a number of different forms. So we have on the next slide somewhat of a continuum from what we traditionally think of as being nonprofit versus for-profit, and kind of have a few examples to get your head around what it looks like to be a purpose-driven business. The examples that we have here, or I guess the terms that we're going to use, are things that, and they all fall under the category of a social benefit company are social enterprise, social business, conscious capitalism, and public benefit corporation. Now, each of these entities might have a different legal status, but they operate in slightly different ways. At a social enterprise level, we'll start on that side that is closer to the nonprofit charities. Social enterprises are companies that you might understand like Bombas. They're companies that are doing their charitable work within their organization and have that mission as integral to their organization. So Bombas produces socks, but they also do the direct giving of a one-to-one match of socks to their charitable mission. A social business, on the other hand, is something like Newman's Own, where you'd see 100% of profits go to charity, but Newman's Own as a company partners with other charitable organizations. So they have that commitment, they have that mission, but they also partner with other organizations. They're not doing that to work directly. Under conscious capitalism, you might think of companies like Starbucks, companies that have a part of their mission that is committed to providing a social impact for, say, their employees when it comes to certain benefits, even as part-time employees. And then lastly, when you think of a public benefit corporation, you might think of a company like Patagonia. These are companies that have a commitment similar to Patagonia to, say, a certain social impact issue. So Patagonia has their commitment to sustainability, the environment, and they have that as very integral to the operations of their business. Aaron, I believe that when we were taking a look at this together, you had a couple of other differentiators between these businesses, and I'd like to turn it over to you anyways to talk about a little bit more about what are benefit corporations legally, what those look like, and just going into a little bit more detail there.
Perfect. Thank you. One of the things that I love so much about working with Carolyn and the angle that she takes on this is that she has all of the data for why it is that running a social impact organization or a social enterprise is so impactful, right? And the statistics that she was showing shows that this is something that is emerging within the business sector. And with the legal side of things, it always takes a little bit longer for us to catch up and sort of address the things that are happening. And so what I like about this slide in particular is it breaks down the different ways that I think people have tried to tiptoe towards what we're talking about, which is how do we incorporate values into a traditional legal structure, which I would say historically has not made a lot of room for that. And so the first thing I want to talk about is why we even have a legal structure like a benefit corporation. And so I will say these are very broad strokes of corporate law, because that's all anybody wants at this point is broad strokes of corporate law. But traditionally, the way that we are taught in law school is that a corporation is supposed to be run for the benefit of the shareholders. And what that means is that if you are a shareholder in a company, what you would want is for your investment in that company to be maximized, meaning you want that company to make as much money as possible because that is then returned to you and you have made a good investment. And so what we say is that directors and officers of a corporation have a legal duty to maximize profits. Now, I will again say that that is sort of a very broad stroke idea, but that is sort of taken as canon in law school. It's like, this is what you do when you run a corporation. Because the flip side is that failure to maximize profits is actually grounds for directors and officers, so the decision makers in a corporation, to be sued. What that means is when we come up against mission-driven companies that want to incorporate their values, even if we know that this is a good business practice, it comes with some friction in the legal system. Because it means that yes, directors and officers can incorporate their values into a social enterprise or into their organization, but only to the extent that it doesn't interfere with a shareholder's bottom line. And so that's the broad strokes of what we were working with before we got to benefit corporations. Now, what I want to make very clear is if you are an organization that is not organized like a benefit corporation, you're not legally incorporated that way. You're a C Corp, you're an LLC, you're a partnership, and you're saying to yourself, hey, I don't actually run my organization in a way that maximizes profits. Don't worry. One, this is, again, very broad strokes of corporate law. Two, there are also nuances in the law that allow you to make decisions, and the law presumes that you are making decisions in the best interest of your shareholders unless there's evidence that you absolutely are not. So again, the default is that you are running them for the benefit of the shareholders or the benefit of the people within your organization. And I will say, again, just because you can get sued by your shareholders for failure to maximize profit doesn't mean that you will. There is a mile of difference between being able to be sued and actually getting sued. And in that is a risk. And as lawyers, we like to minimize that risk. And that is why the legislation has been put in place, is to address the holes or the gaps that we found when there were organizations that wanted to run as C Corps or as LLCs, but wanted to be freed from the mandates of what traditional corporate law required. And so those are the holes that benefit corporation legislation tries to address. So what Carolyn said is, yes, it's legal in 36 states. Again, in the law world, we say that corporations are a creature of state law. So you don't apply for a federal charter, you apply for a state charter. And that's each state has their own body of corporate law as to how organizations are run and structured. And so 36 states allow for benefit corporations to be formed in their state, including Pennsylvania and including Delaware, which is a state where a lot of organizations are incorporated. Again, it's meant to address the holes that we saw in traditional corporate legislation. So first is every benefit corporation must be as their purpose. They must be organized to create a material positive impact on society and the environment. So right away, baked into your charter is this idea that there must be a material positive impact on society and the environment. Second hole it addresses is it makes a commitment to stakeholder considerations legally binding. What that means is instead of having a duty just to maximize shareholder profits, now that duty runs to anybody who is impacted by the decision-making of the corporation. So if a corporation is, for example, going to be buying an office building, under traditional rules, you look at that office building, how expensive is it? Does that fit in with the corporation's bottom line? Okay, if it does, then we're good. What happens under a benefit corporation is the considerations become a little bit more holistic, is how I like to talk about it. Looking at the same office building, we're not just going to look at how much it is per square foot. Instead, the directors and officers making decisions about that office building are going to say, okay, where is it located? What is the community around that office building? What does that community think about us moving in there? What does that look like for our employees who will have to commute there? Is this building LEED certified? Does it fit in with our environmental mission? And making those decisions, that makes those decisions legally binding on the corporation. They actually have to put into their meeting minutes or into their other decision-making processes that they looked at all of these different considerations. Another thing that some statutes require is the appointment of a benefit director. So there's somebody on the board of directors who is tasked with actually making sure these decisions are made. Requires filing of an annual benefit report. So it's not just good enough to say, I'm a benefit corporation, I'm doing this. States require that you actually put forward to your shareholders and to the public and say, I have been taking these decisions. These are the ways I've tried to create a material positive impact on society. These are the ways I've succeeded. These are the ways I've failed. And these are the ways I'm trying to address those failures. And finally, and this is what we like in the legal world, is it provides protections for directors and officers who are making those decisions. So rather than opening them up to a whole bunch of liability for making decisions based on different stakeholder considerations, it says that you can make those decisions, but you're not liable to every single person who's impacted by that decision. So say, for example, one of your benefits on society, you as a corporation decided you would make sure that your operations didn't pollute waterways. And then your operations did pollute waterways. Save the Whales couldn't come and sue your organization. It would have to be somebody within the organization by statute that would have to sue in order to enforce that specific benefit. So it's a nuance of the law, but it just means that there's a little bit more protection for directors and officers. What each of these are meant to do is, again, address issues that we saw in traditional corporate law, which is look at accountability, transparency, and protection. Make sure that yes, there is a way to say that you're incorporating your values into your legal structure, make a commitment to those values and show how it is that you're addressing them. And then also make sure that the people making those decisions have protection from the law. So there's a little bit of incentive to continue to make decisions this way, and you don't open yourself up to a lot of liability. Now, I will say that becoming a benefit corporation isn't the only way legally you can incorporate your values into your organization. There are ways to take your governance documents, so the documents that you already have in your organization, and amend them so that you can incorporate these values and incorporate the protections for your directors and officers, but not have to do things like file an annual report or appoint a benefit director. So there's a way to sort of like pick and choose a little bit of what you want. It's one of the reasons I like corporate law, is that there's room for flexibility and sort of creativity within what you're creating. Another way to go about it is to apply for B Corp certification. So B Corp is a certification, much like LEED certification or Fair Trade certification, that is administered by an organization called B Labs. It's a nonprofit third party, and they will make you take a very, very extensive certification, like all the way down to like, do you have low flushing toilets? It's a very specific certification. But what that does is it's a signal to the outside world that you are committed to your values, because that certification is so extensive. You do have to recertify every year, and how much you pay for that certification is graded based on your revenue. The one caveat I will say is this is on a, I think, 180 point or 200 point scale or something like that. If you are incorporated as a benefit corporation, you get a significant number of points towards your certification. You don't have to be incorporated as a benefit corporation, but they do make it so that that's a pretty significant consideration underneath the points that you get. And then finally, what you can also do is amend your corporate policies. So rather than changing the governance structure and the way you make decisions at sort of higher levels, you can make sure that your policies reflect your values. And that's things like incorporating how employee compensation policies or executive compensation policies, or looking at your ethics or code of ethics, all of things that like you can already have within your organization, but it's a way to legally embed your values in an enforceable way within your corporation and still get those aspects of accountability to those values, but without having to fundamentally change your governance structure. There's just degrees of commitment and risk that you might want to be taking on or not. And so even from a legal side, we see there's a lot of benefits to being a social enterprise, right? First is mitigating risk. Rather than operating under a traditional organization and wanting to incorporate your stakeholder values into that organization, which can be risky without the protections, these protections then protect you from, or protect the decision makers from a certain amount of risk. And also, I work with a lot of early stage companies. I work with a lot of tech companies who are looking for investment. And they're always asking me, if I go down this route, will I get more investors, or will this hurt my ability to attract investors? So it does fundamentally change your investor profile, because you're saying, my company cares about stakeholder values. My company cares about more than just making money. And what I've seen is the people who have done this and are looking for investors have actually found it to be really positive. So it's easy to mission align between them and their investors. And there's more and more funds and more venture capitalists who are interested in investing in this kind of company. And we can talk about why that is sort of on the next slide. But there does seem to be at least a matchup between these kind of companies and the investors they're looking for. That's not to say across the board. There are plenty of investors who have no interest in this, but any investor, anybody who's looking for money wants to have some sort of mission alignment between them and their investor. This is a good litmus test to see if they're aligned. As Carolyn was saying earlier, this kind of company attracts talent. Employees want to work for this kind of company. There's benchmarking. You actually have an ability, you have a mandate to measure what it is that you're doing, and you have an ability to understand sort of what decisions you're making are doing well for your company and not, and get a good feedback loop for what it is that you're doing that is successful. And as Carolyn was saying, it builds trust. More and more across the entire world, people are seeing business as being the most ethical and the most competent organizations. And so putting yourself out there as, we have incorporated our values into the fundamental basis of our legal structure, builds trust within that organization. I will not read this slide, but this is the financial argument for being a social enterprise. I look now and I'm like, these statistics are a little bit outdated, but I always find them very compelling, because a lot of times when we're looking at business, right, we have a lot of high-minded values, and that's great. And we have a lot of ways that we want business to change the world, and that's great. These to me show that business is absolutely able to do well while doing good. Because what we're seeing is that over years, now this is a long-term investment, but over years, what we have is organizations that have committed to their values, and they're seeing a significant financial return, right? So when Carolyn was talking about how 89% of leaders see this as a competitive advantage, here's the competitive advantage. It comes down to the actual dollars and cents that these companies are making. Now, that said, like I said, I work with a lot of early stage companies. That's really good for BP, for Patagonia, for Starbucks, for, you know, anybody else that has a significant amount of capital behind them to play around with. But I'm looking at people who have 2 full-time jobs and are trying to start a new organization and are trying to get this thing off the ground. The real risk is resource allocation. Like, how is it that you can actually incorporate your values and be committed to those values when you have so many things competing for your attention and your money? And so it's a lot of trying to do these things piecemeal as it is that organizations are building. So how can we build in fundamental values while also being, you know, conscious of the business case that's actually happening here? From a legal perspective, social enterprises are a new kind of business entity. As Carolyn was saying, Maryland was the first state to adopt this kind of business entity in 2010. It's not a lot of time for the courts to have tested what these different assumptions mean. So that means when a business or a benefit corporation is sued, I don't know how a court is going to react. And so I don't know how to counsel my clients on what the risks are and what the pitfalls are, because we don't know yet. And so that's a little bit of anxiety for me as a lawyer in particular, but just something I try to make my clients aware of. You know, potentially expanded liability for directors and officers. Like I said, there's protections built into the statute, but that doesn't mean that, again, we're trying to see how these entities will be tested, and I don't know sort of what the liability could be under those circumstances. Additional business and reputational risk. When you go out and put a stake in the ground and say, these are my values, and then you violate those values, there's an additional reputational risk that you open yourself up to if you're not going to be living up to them. And so it's making sure, again, can you adhere to those values, and can you do it in a way that grows with you, rather than making things that are a little bit too outside of your reach and then coming back and saying, oh, actually, I couldn't do that, and now I'm suffering more than if I had not put that stake in the ground in the first place. And then finally, investment opportunities, which we talked about a little bit, but there will be investors who aren't interested in this kind of entity. But to be fair, there are investors that are not interested in all kinds of entities. So I think this can kind of cut both ways, but I think I'd be remiss not to at least say, you know, you're going to have to make the business case for what you do and why it is you've chosen this kind of entity. I think, Carolyn, heading back to you.
Yeah, no, perfect. And I loved you talking about the long-term investment and long-term growth and success that we've seen in purpose-driven companies, because I think to this point, you and I have talked a lot about purpose and how purpose fits into business. But as anyone who's ever run a business or a nonprofit knows, you need resources to be able to make things happen within your organization, whether you're making a product, delivering a service, or providing something to your community. And so being able to have a well-operating business, it's not enough to have just your purpose. You need to also have a very good product or service as well to be able to grow that successful. And I think that's part of the power of having purpose-driven businesses, is there's that equal value given to both creating a profit as well as standing firm on your values. Which is kind of where we come back to that importance of measuring social impact, is that when we give back to our communities in a number of different ways, we're making an investment in the work that we're doing, and we're expecting to see, if we're talking about social impact as being a positive change, we want to be able to see something happen within those communities. So having a good understanding of what our KPIs or key purpose indicators are that help us move that needle will help us understand that social return and allow us to make intentional decisions about where we're putting our time and our efforts and our company's policies, whether you're nonprofit, for-profit, you know, regardless of your legal entity status. It's important to be able to have that backing, to build that trust, and to understand where you're going, making internal decisions for your business. Because if we do want to see a change in our communities, we want to make sure, if it's not happening, that we're adjusting so that we can reach the goals that we have. When we've talked a little bit about the way in which these companies address demonstrating those social impact measurements that they have, we think a little bit about what's more traditionally seen as business and how they communicate outward versus, say, a purpose-driven business. So traditionally, when we think about any kind of business communicating what they do, they're focused maybe on the idea of solving a problem on the direct products or services, and it's usually derived from their operation. So it helps people make a decision of, yes, I want to buy tickets to that movie, or I really need that grill because it's the best grill. Whereas with purpose-driven communications, you have the opportunity to focus on some different things as well. While we're still solving a problem, purpose-driven organizations tend to focus, in addition to some of the products and services that they have, on the core values of their organization. So usually it's derived from a mission rather than the operations in the day-to-day of what they're doing, which means that it doesn't only help people make a decision, but it helps them understand the difference that they're making when they're investing in that organization's work. And that opens us up to a number of different possibilities when we communicate and demonstrate the work that we do. And Erin talked a little earlier about having, even if you don't have a public benefit corporation, the idea of being able to incorporate some of these values into current business operating models, whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit. And so when we think about the idea of designing for impact, there does have to be that strategy, that intentional approach to thinking about it. So it's really making sure you have a defined mission, aligning those objectives with the goals that you have for your operations, as well as the goals that you have for change, and then communicating authentically about how that's happening, whether you're meeting those goals or whether you're falling short, and what you're doing about those types of things, or even just celebrating progress and the people involved with helping you get that far. And that all ties into demonstrating the outcomes that your organization is able to have. One of the great ways that I've thought about this on the next slide is being able to really move around some of the work that you do. So when you have meaningful measures to demonstrate your impact, what you're able to do is doing the do good math for people, so to speak. So being able to demonstrate data in different ways. And data is more than just the numbers that you have. It's also the stories and things that you can see happening. You'll see on the side here, this is from a article that is called The Lego Data Story. And it just shows whenever you have data, it's kind of all in a jumbled pile and you have to really work it out. So you can sort it, arrange it, present it, but then you can also do some really great things with it, like explain it with a story or turn it into something that's useful and actionable. And that's how I like to think about that idea of social impact measurement, is we're not just doing this so that we are providing items for our stakeholders, although that is a very important part of our legal benefit and risk. We're also doing it so that we can see and explain how the work that we're doing is making a difference, and we're using it to make those actions more intentional and meaningful for us. So providing those updates towards your progress, towards your purpose, are also very important to incorporating that social impact within the work that you're doing, regardless of what type of entity you are. So with that, we'd love to open it up to any questions and just get some feedback too about where your thoughts are and what you've seen. I know both Erin and I have seen a number of very exciting things happening in the Pittsburgh region, and we're so glad to be here today with the Pittsburgh North Regional Chamber and just learn a little bit more about what's going on here too. So thank you so much. And yeah, we'll open it up to questions.
Feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question you'd like to ask Carolyn and or Erin.
Scott looks like he's thinking real hard, Carrie.
He does, yes.
Yeah, I am, but I'm thinking of how to formulate my question. So I understand the basic concept, but how does like so I work with New York Life, and New York Life donates, millions of dollars a year to all kinds of things. So what's in your ladies' minds, what's the differentiation between a company trying to do, good things with charitable donations through our foundation and then stepping up to be a B Corp, or is it just a legal distinction? Because it seems like, and there are other companies that do a lot of good things too. So I'm trying to see where the line is. Where do you, when do you become a B Corp? Or when does someone, think they actually need to take that step versus, just a company, making significant donations to various efforts.
Do you want to take this one first, Aaron, or?
Sure, yeah,
Or
I
can I?
can do that.
Sorry, I knew I needed to formulate it better.
No, I think it's a really good question. It's why I like that one slide that Carolyn had where it's sort of like the different sort of slices of social enterprise, because there's so many different ways to incorporate your values into an organization. And so for me, the delineation between sort of when you want to be a corporation that, is doing good things versus being a benefit corporation is how fundamental you want that consideration to be to your decision making. Meaning like, New York Life can continue to run and make profit the way that it's been making its profit. And then anything above that, it can have a policy that it can run through its foundation to make donations. And so there's no friction really between what New York Life is doing, on a day-to-day basis and their charitable giving. If an organization starts to want to bring that a little bit closer to their for-profit offerings, and that's either in how it is that they're running the business writ large, like the entire business itself, or in the products and services that they're offering, I would say that would then weigh in favor of maybe converting over to a benefit corporation, because at that point, then it allows you to have a little bit more protection for the people who are making the decisions. But I think as what Carolyn was pointing out, I mean, there's so many different ways to do that. And not many corporations yet have taken the leap into sort of the commitment that is making all of their decisions based on their values or having that baked into their governance structure. Because there's always ways to approximate it without, again, opening up the risk that, of what these new entities are. Does that help?
And I
Yes,
think
thank you.
and I think another good example of that too is having that purpose from the outside. So I think most banks, financial institutions that I've seen generally have a sense that they would like to contribute to the financial security and well-being of the individuals that they serve. So they do have some sort of mission around that. But are they tracking the social return on that whenever they take a look at their clients? Are they making sure that those social measures, in addition to the financial measures of profit that they're seeing, and how do those guide their decisions? In Pittsburgh, we have Honeycomb Credit that is sort of a financial lending organization, and one of their primary goals is to be able to open up capital to individuals that don't historically have access to it. So they, as opposed to any bank can provide a small business loan. But I would say if we're thinking about a social impact business versus just a bank or a financial entity with a mission, we're looking at the difference between how they track and how they ensure they're meeting those goals. So Honeycomb Credit every year makes sure to track how many jobs they're creating, how much money they're lending out. They also track how many of those individuals are historically underserved, businesses owned by people of color, businesses owned by women, and some of those other considerations in addition to the other work that they're doing within their lending. So I do think there's a lot of action behind the demonstrating. And the thing that I think I find with working with businesses is that there's no one right way to do good. Like we might say New York Life may not necessarily be a social impact business, but it doesn't mean that their foundation isn't leveraging the assets they have to be able to make a positive contribution. If that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
I didn't notice that Tom and Kathy had joined us. Kathy, do you have any legal questions?
I hope she jumps on and asks the question doing that pose that she does in her headshot.
Hi, I'm sorry. I'm driving, so I mostly was here just to listen and support Carolyn. So, but I unfortunately I missed the beginning of Carolyn talk with Carolyn because my presentation ran over because we had robust discussion and everything. So I'll catch up with Carolyn later. But I know it's very interesting to hear about it, though. I would like to learn more, so I do appreciate it.
Yeah, Aaron, Kathy's with the Lynch Law Group, so.
Oh, nice.
Awesome. Any other questions, comments, ideas now?
Carolyn, did you talk about the chocolate company that you're working with at all?
No, we haven't talked about the chocolate
Oh,
company
I
yet.
think everyone would find it
But-
fascinating
But
potentially.
yeah, they're a great example of a company that's kind of a budding introductory to their social impact corporation. They and I'll be as broad as possible because we want to make sure that we're being fair to them as well. But their name is Spectrum Fudge. They are a confectionery company that was founded based on the family who had a son who was on the autism spectrum, and they started looking around at job opportunities and realized that there really aren't that many job opportunities out there for children who are on the spectrum with intellectual disabilities. And so they bought this company as a means to open up opportunities for job training for individuals who are either on the spectrum or intellectual disabilities. And now we're in the process of taking a closer look at how they can expand that mission to be able to serve more individuals, connect with more organizations, and really take that business to the next level. But they're a great example of how a business, the chocolate is something that makes everyone happy, but the real mission and soul behind the chocolate is what's driving a lot of the strategic decisions that they're making at this time about how they are going to grow and what's going to be the best way to be able to expand. So a really great example of just one business within our region that is working from that purpose-driven sector. Yeah. Erin, I know you have a number of clients that you work with. Any you want to talk about publicly?
That's always the question. Yeah, I think there are a number of companies in Pittsburgh in particular, which is exciting. And again, that's whether they are addressing a social issue. So there are people I work with who are addressing food waste issues, recycling issues, plastic-free chewing gum, things that like all fit in I think a social enterprise. And then there are other people who are the way that they run their business is considered a social enterprise. So I'm working with somebody who does robotic manufacturing, and they are incorporated as a benefit corporation. So even though their product is focused on making drone cameras, at least for now, they are also organized in a way that's very mindful of, how many women are on their board, how many women they hire in their manufacturing shop. It's significantly employee owned. And so again, looking at the way that their operations are having impact on different stakeholders, even though I would say that their goods and services are not necessarily aimed at a particular social or environmental issue.
Harry, do you have any thoughts? I know that you see a lot of different businesses at the chamber.
We do, and we have been in talks with Spectrum Fudge to incorporate into the farmers market. Unfortunately, they're not able to, but so I'm very aware of what they do. I don't really know that off the top of my head what chamber members fit into the realm of social impact that I know of. Do you know what I mean? I'm sure that, like, kind of what Scott was saying is we know that there are several that give back in donations and support the community and sponsor different things, and but it's different, right? This is something to the next level of that, and so there, like I said, there isn't anything off of the top of my head that I can name. I mean, I don't know, Tom, would you think Dress for Success would be something that might fall under that realm?
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I was just reading about Erin on LinkedIn. Very impressed. There's 29 mutual friends, and Erin ran varsity track at University of Virginia. I don't know if she mentioned that earlier.
That's true. Many lifetimes ago.
Now, Dress for Success is amazing. That Liz Mims, right? That's our friend from
Right.
there, Carrie. We might even be with her in 38 minutes from now. But
Right.
at Nonprofits North. But yeah, no, they're great. And I put in the chat, but yeah, Molly, my colleague, I know Carolyn, when you were here, you chatted with a couple of my colleagues, but I don't think Molly was with us that day. But yeah, we look forward to working with Spectrum Fudge. I know not a chamber member. Are they a chamber member or not yet? They're not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. Once they see this recording though and see how many times their name was said, they're gonna join.
That is possible.
That is possible.
Yeah, so I mean, that would be something that would be interesting to, dig deeper in based on, our membership. Maybe that's another category that we add to, woman-owned, minority-owned, veteran-owned, maybe that's a category that we add to the application too, that, social impact driven.
Right. I'd have to look into where it is now, but I know at one point in the last 2 or 3 years, Better Business Bureau was piloting a program called BBB for Good. And I guess they had been getting a number of requests for people who were consumers looking to know, are there organizations that fit X, Y, and Z mission? And so part of Better Business Bureau's plan in this pilot stage is to have a list like they do for every other organization who comes through and is a certified Better Business Bureau organization, so that individuals who are consumers, who are conscious of the products that they're buying and the impact that they have, can find those. And so there are, like I said, I'll have to check in and see where that is, but there are a number of ways I'm sure consumers could utilize information on social impact, especially when they're in connection with the either places like Better Business Bureau or even their local chambers too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm making a note now of possibly, putting down on our application form. All right. Well, we only have a couple more minutes. Is there any other kinds of questions that anybody might have thought of? Everyone's like, I don't think so. All right. Well, thank you, ladies, for being with us this afternoon, and thank you to those who are on the call for joining us for this topic. And have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank
Nice
you.
meeting
Thank you
Erin.
very much.
Good
See you,
job as always,
folks. Thank
Carolynn
you,
Keller.
ladies.
Okay.
Good to see you
Bye,
all.
everybody.